When I was growing up, my parents smoked. I started smoking at age 16. Both my parents died in their 50s, both tobacco-related causes. This tape was made 2 days before my surgery, and it's more or less my old voice.
As I walked into the tree, there was hanging by a web.
One thing I noticed is that I laugh a lot. That's probably what I miss most about not having the old voice. Now when I laugh, it's kind of like, you know. Before, it was just more spontaneous and just more part of who I was, and it's a part of myself that I lost, that I missed.
Wouldn't a cigarette taste good right now?
The tobacco industry is one of the few industries in the world that promotes a product that, if used as intended, kills its customers. So I think its conduct is among the most outrageous of multinational corporations.
I gave the tobacco industry my parents. I gave the tobacco industry thousands of dollars. I gave the tobacco industry my larynx, the muscle that goes from the back of the head down to the collarbone, the jugular vein on the right side of my neck, 19 lymph nodes on the right side of my neck, and a large part of my thyroid. So I've given tobacco a lot more than it ever gave to me.
You got a lot to like with a Marlboro filter, flavor, pack or box.
The story of tobacco in this country and in this world is a story that's based on a lie. They've known about these dangers since at least the early 50s, and it has been essential to their continued profitability and success to continue to lie, to continue to mislead, to continue assuring that the public at large doesn't get the details of all the inside information.
In 1998, the tobacco industry's secret archives were forced open by a Minnesota state lawsuit. The public could finally see what U.S. tobacco corporations had been hiding for years.
There was a meeting in New York in 1954. Interesting that even the CEOs at that time were willing to come together because they were actually under an order not to meet. But they met in secret. They were so concerned about some of the evidence that started to show up about problems related to cancer, lung cancer in particular, and smoking, that they thought they had to do something about it. And that was when, frankly, in my view, they had a choice. They could have either disclosed what they knew and be concerned about it, or they were going to go down the road of marketing an idea and trying to show that, no, there was nothing to any of these allegations. They chose the latter.
Something wonderful happens when you change to Philip Morris. You'll feel better.
According to this nationwide survey, more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette.
None of the things which have been found in tobacco smoke are at concentrations which can be considered harmful.
But the components themselves can be considered harmful, can they not?
Anything can be considered harmful. Applesauce is harmful if you get too much of it.
Every time there was more studies that came out, there was always some scientist somewhere that would say, well, I'm not so sure that this proves this or that, and they worked very hard at that. And this was some of the most sophisticated propaganda that I think this country and the marketplace has ever seen.
The Flintstones has been brought to you by Winston.
The tobacco companies were also busy trying to monopolize the highly profitable youth market.
The tobacco industry, when you look at their execution of strategy in the marketplace, they're clearly going after youth because they understand if they get them young, they become long-term consumers.
They were looking at kids as annuities. You get them addicted, and on they go. And they pay out and pay out and pay out until, of course, they die.
The internal documents show that the corporations were conducting research to target children.
Some of the most damning documents are those that have come up that have a PM for Philip Morris stamped on the document in the course of discovery. Here's one in which the document reads, "We have already collaborated with a local school system in identifying some such children," referring to future smokers, "in the 3rd grade. Another, the ability to attract new smokers and develop them into a young adult franchise is the key to brand development." Another, from Philip Morris in 1981, "Today's teenager is tomorrow's potential regular customer."
The fact that Marlboro became the #1 cigarette among American teenagers was no accident.
Marlboro Longhorn.
Its advertising mascot, the Marlboro Cowboy, was described by its creator Jack Landry as the right image to capture the youth market's fancy, a perfect symbol of independence and individualistic rebellion.
Wherever you go, that's Marlboro country.
You find literally a smoking gun in these documents. Here is one that is March 31st, 1981, from the Philip Morris USA Research Center. The cigarette should be conceived not as a product, but as a package. The product is nicotine. Think of the cigarette as a dispenser for a dose unit of nicotine. They're selling a product that is designed to hook young people on nicotine and addict them for life.
My father was one of a family of a bunch of boys, and they began smoking when they were probably 12 or 13. One of the things about my father was that he was the kind of person that could do anything. Everybody knew who Charlie Sutton was, and everybody knew that you could go to him for any kind of problem. If you couldn't figure out what your contract said, you could go to Charlie Sutton. But the one thing that he couldn't do, no matter what he tried to do, was to quit smoking. And for tobacco to have taken him so early, that is a lot of what fuels my work.
Come to where the flavor is. Come to Marlboro country.
By 1972, Marlboro gained its grip as the world's leading cigarette brand. Riding on its success, Philip Morris became the biggest and richest tobacco corporation in the world. In the 1980s, the company spent $19 billion to acquire major food brands and their positive public images.
They bought products that were beloved in the American psyche. Macaroni and cheese, Jell-O, cookies.
Virtually every American family, more than 9 out of 10 households, have our Kraft Food and Miller Brewing Company products in their pantries, from Kraft macaroni and cheese to Maxwell House coffee.
One of the reasons why Philip Morris and the other tobacco companies bought the kind of subsidiaries they bought is that they were forced off of television.
I think it looks like a rolling sun.
The TV stations and the radio stations were still very reluctant to talk about tobacco in any kind of negative way for fear of losing the enormous ad revenues that came from the food companies.
The food subsidiaries also increased Philip Morris's power on Capitol Hill.
There are so many ways for a company like Philip Morris to hide its campaign influence. And so Philip Morris can give through Kraft, there's plausible deniability for a candidate from office, that they didn't take money from the folks at Philip Morris, they were taking Kraft cheese money.
Kraft macaroni and cheese dinners, more shapes, more fun, and still the cheesiest.
But behind Kraft's wholesome image lay a troubling reality. Studies linking Philip Morris's primary product, cigarettes, with deadly illnesses were piling up. and the 1988 Surgeon General's report contained strong new evidence that nicotine was as addictive a drug as heroin or cocaine. Faced with growing public resistance at home, Philip Morris took a new approach.
We are Philip Morris International, the leading exporter of American cigarettes. As economies grow and trade barriers fall, new political and economic freedoms are creating new opportunities for BMI.
When the Berlin Wall came down, Philip Morris began taking over the national tobacco monopolies of the former Soviet republics and Eastern Europe. In the Czech Republic, Philip Morris paid $400 million in 1992 for a majority share of the state tobacco industry. It was the biggest single U.S. investment in Central Europe that year.
I don't remember any tobacco advertising when I was a child during the communist era, but after the fall of the Iron Curtain, the tobacco has come, and they've started like big advertising campaigns focused mostly on young people or youth.
There
was an explosion in tobacco advertising on billboards. There were different contests where young people were asked to collect cigarette boxes, and after a certain number, they were eligible to win cars.
Many of the tactics Philip Morris uses would never be allowed in the United States, like advertising in movies popular with young people. Philip Morris came to the small town of Kutná Hora in 1995 and transformed the state cigarette factory into a modern production facility. The new plant included a museum celebrating Philip Morris's arrival.
The museum is about tobacco, about the history of tobacco growing in the Czech lands, but also about Philip Morris and about cigarette manufacturing. This is Philip Morris. This is Kraft, who founded the Kraft food company. You can see that Ronald Reagan was once working for Philip Morris. This is a cigarette making machine, but it still was in work 4 years ago. These machines made about 2,500 cigarettes per minute. Today we have machines which make about 8,000 cigarettes a minute.
Philip Morris controls 85% of the Czech cigarette market, producing Marlboro and the national favorite, Petra.
Altogether, we produce about 30 billion cigarettes a year. Philip Morris in the Czech Republic.
Do České republiky se Philip Morris dostal tak jako... Philip Morris came to the Czech Republic, as it did to other Eastern European countries, simply because they wanted to expand into new markets. I think they assumed the Czech Republic would present a good opportunity for them, and we are not happy about it. Because after advertising came, the smoking rate among children increased.
Smoking rates among 15 and 16-year-olds rose over 40% after Philip Morris arrived. Public health advocates have tried to restrict tobacco advertising, but Philip Morris uses its money and influence to block tobacco control legislation.
In 1994, a law about advertising in the Czech Republic was being prepared. And I was informed that before it was to be debated in Parliament, Philip Morris recruited about 20 legislators and invited them on a trip to Switzerland. When they returned, a law was passed, and the entire section on tobacco control was written by advertising agencies working for Philip Morris.
Philip Morris is now a $62 billion global corporation. It is able to influence policy and governments worldwide through its enormous wealth and a powerful board of directors that includes international media giant Rupert Murdoch, global financier and board member of Sloan Kettering Cancer Center John Reed, and Carlos Slim, the richest man in Latin America. Even in countries where governments have managed to establish strong tobacco control laws, Philip Morris has been an industry leader in finding loopholes and figuring out ways to get around the law.
In Malaysia, direct cigarette advertisements are banned in the mass media. However, they set up little stores called the Marlboro Classic store, which then sells the paraphernalia carrying the Marlboro brand. And this way, they get to advertise in the mass media. So this is an effective way to circumvent the law. Cigarette advertisements are not allowed on television. However, Philip Morris organizes what is known as Marlboro Adventure. Malaysian citizens can apply to go on a Marlboro Adventure in the US. This is on national television in Malaysia.
The tobacco industry in particular do a very good job of recruiting their future consumers and holding on to their existing consumers through branding, whether it's through caricatures like the Marlboro Man, or more importantly through promotional items. They brand the Philip Morris name everywhere. It's another way of getting the name out there into the marketplace.
U.S. tobacco corporations first gained access to Asian markets in the late 1980s by taking advantage of their political influence at home.
The U.S. Trade Office very effectively forced open markets in Taiwan, Japan, Korea, and Thailand.
Some of these countries had restrictions on advertising, and the administration maintained that that was an improper trade restriction, that the American companies couldn't have fair access if they couldn't advertise. And the results, of course, were just disastrous, because as the American companies have very sophisticated advertising techniques came into Asia, they were able to increase the amount of youth smoking dramatically.
In Vietnam, Philip Morris produces cigarettes in a joint venture with the government. Its distributors evade a ban on tobacco advertising by making their salespeople into walking billboards.
Vietnamese law prohibits advertising, but the tobacco companies bypass the law. For example, this poster does not contain the word Marlboro at all. It just says, "Determined to win." But people can just look at the cowboy and recognize it's Marlboro. The tobacco companies give us the umbrellas. The Marlboro people are very enthusiastic. If the umbrella gets dirty, they're eager to give us a new one.
Sampling, or giving out free cigarettes, is widely acknowledged to encourage youth to smoke and is restricted in almost every industrialized country. But in Vietnam, despite an advertising ban, sampling girls regularly hand out free Marlboros.
Sampling doesn't violate the law because our law only prohibits advertising in the mass media. This is considered promotional activity. The first cigarette is a free sample, but then you have to buy the whole pack. These consumers are all young boys, and it's very hard for them to say no to the girls. These tobacco companies really understand the consumer psyche.
At Philip Morris, we want to resolve the important issues relating to the manufacture and sale of all of our products, especially tobacco. In 1995, Philip Morris voluntarily stopped cigarette distribution that could not be carefully controlled, such as the free sampling of cigarettes. And in 1997, we voluntarily stopped distributing branded non-tobacco items such as Marlboro hats and T-shirts in response to public concerns.
The American citizens have been quite effective in chasing out the Marlboro man from Marlboro country, but unfortunately he's riding into the markets in Asia. The poorest of smokers today are in the developing world, where countries are struggling with the issue of poverty, with the issue of drought and famine and wars. Tobacco use is a man-made and created problem. So this is something that developing countries cannot afford at all. I think for too long we have been looking at tobacco as a health issue. It's an economic issue, it's a development issue, it's a poverty issue.
There is growing concern internationally about the devastating impact of the tobacco epidemic on national healthcare budgets.
It's really not easy for Vietnam and many other developing countries to deal with tobacco. It is harmful not only for the hands, but I think it's not good also for the economy, because the country have to support patients for treatment.
Tỷ lệ hút thuốc lá ở các nước phát triển thì thấp.
The smoking rate in the developed countries is dropping. But they are bringing cigarettes to the less developed countries for both consumption and production. This is causing the smoking rate here to get higher and higher. We need a global treaty to prevent the big cigarette companies from bringing their product to the developing world.
We must face up to the reality of how the use of tobacco is damaging our people and our societies.
The World Health Organization has initiated a framework convention on tobacco control, a global treaty that could set international limits on the tobacco industry's advertising, promotion, and political influence.
What will happen with the framework convention is that it will encourage governments to take measures faster. It will also enable there to be minimum standards established across the globe. And it will also mean that the question of double standards would be addressed. Hence, we can tackle once and for all the way tobacco transnationals have been operating outside of their home countries.
Opposition is also continuing to grow in the United States, where the tobacco industry still addicts 3,000 teenagers every day. Groups like the Corporate Accountability Organization, in fact, are challenging Philip Morris on its home turf. Part of InFact's strategy is a boycott of Philip Morris's Kraft Foods, focusing on its trademark macaroni and cheese.
Whether you smoke or not, you can get mad at the way the tobacco industry is abusing you. And what I do is I boycott products that I know are made by the tobacco industry. I refuse to buy Kraft. It's sold by Philip Morris.
In San Francisco, students organized and got the entire school district to boycott tobacco-owned food products.
The reason why we chose to do a boycott was we wanted to involve other people in this struggle. So it wasn't just the 10 of us who were fighting for this change, but it involved 500 people that we got signatures from, the 100 people that we interviewed, all of the kids who helped us do surveys, and it became a much bigger thing than just our group.
Boycotts are a really great way for organized consumers to vote with their pocketbooks about the policies and practices of giant corporations.
InFact has successfully organized 2 major grassroots boycotts since 1977. One targeting Nestle that resulted in significant reforms in the marketing of infant formula, and another forcing industry leader General Electric out of the nuclear weapons business.
We're calling on Philip Morris and the other tobacco corporations to stop tobacco marketing and promotion that appeals to children and young people, to stop interfering in public policy on issues of tobacco and health, and to pay the high costs of health care associated with the tobacco epidemic. So we've been very specific. We've delivered these challenges directly to the corporations. They know exactly what it is that INFACT is campaigning about, and they're responding.
Hi. Hi. Hey, what's with the makeup?
In October, the corporation revamped its entire public relations strategy.
All right, 10 o'clock. Don't forget what we talked about. No
drinking and no smoking.
Right.
Philip Morris is running a series of advertisements they say are designed to prevent youth smoking. But a Centers for Disease Control study found the ads don't work and may even encourage youth to smoke.
The laws prohibited tobacco companies from advertising on radio and TV. And this is another way of Philip Morris getting their name out in the marketplace.
I want to thank the people at the food bank for all the food you've been bringing me.
Philip Morris is now highlighting its connection with Kraft.
For over 20 years, Kraft, part of the Philip Morris family of companies, has been a leader in the fight against hunger, working to make a difference. The people of Philip Morris.
I think that ultimately this will backfire, and that you can't say enough good things to make up for all the damage that Philip Morris has done.
The tobacco industry killed 100 million people in 20th century, and if we maintain our patterns, it will kill more than 1 billion people in the 21st century.
A child is a child anywhere, and if a company that operates out of Richmond, Virginia is addicting kids in Austin, Texas, that's wrong. But if they're addicting kids halfway around the world, that's equally wrong, and I'm outraged by it.
That would be my dream, to see citizens of US rising up to not just protecting and preserving life in the US, but to extend this beyond the borders of the US.
As the public demand for accountability of Philip Morris rises in the US, we need to make sure that this corporation is not allowed to export its deadly and addictive product and its dirty tactics to other parts of the world.